Hello everyone. I'm wanting to redo my review of One More Day and One Moment in Time, the intro for it, I mean. And so I'm just going to go ahead and just start right away. So One More Day tied into the Marvel event Civil War, which was by Mark Millar. He was the writer. He based it off the Patriot Act by George Bush because he hated that act, which made the government spy on everyone's phone conversations and I think on their online emails too. So anyway, he hated that and he wanted to do a story based around it. And I don't like what he did. In fact, I like the movie Civil War more than the actual comic. It was a very political story based obviously off political things. And here are some things that I don't like about what Tony Stark and Reed Richards did in that story. So they make a robot clone of Thor who is subservient to their will, and they make it subservient to their will. And by the way, said Thor clone kills Bill Foster, an African-American character who some of you might know from Ant-Man 2, played by Lawrence Fishburne. Anyway, they kill off him, and he's never come back to comics, by the way. And then they also put their captured fellow heroes who opposed registration into a negative zone prison. The negative zone is a dimension that's been around since at least sometime in the 1960s, that was discovered by Reed Richards, and it makes you feel immensely depressed. So yeah, they take all their captured heroes and put them in a dimension where they feel immensely depressed. And not only that, they send psychopathic villains after Spider-Man who nearly succeed in killing him, if not for the Punisher coming in, blowing those villains away and taking the injured Peter Parker back to Captain America where they were able to get him medical treatment. By the way, they later sent a lot of the same psychopathic villains after Captain America. So they do that. And despite all these really bad things, they are actually declared to be the right side at the end of the story. Yeah, all that is considered okay. Well, the thing about One More Day is it was an editorial mandated story, and that Joe Quesada, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, forced J. Michael Straczynski, who'd been writing Spider-Man comics for 5 years, into having Aunt May get shot by a sniper via getting hired by the Kingpin. Yeah, the Kingpin had a sniper shoot and kill Aunt May. He wanted to kill Peter Parker, but they ended up shooting Aunt May. And the solution, Joe Quesada told J. Michael Straczynski, is that he had to have Spider-Man and Mary Jane make a deal with an evil demon from hell in exchange for bringing Aunt May back to life, basically. And not only that, but the thing that really made J. Michael Straczynski mad is he was told that the deal had to undo the 5-year story he'd written of Aunt May and Peter being closer than ever because of Peter having revealed 5 years before his identity to Aunt May. And so yeah, Aunt May and Peter were closer than ever, and J. Michael Straczynski was told that had to go. So because of this, J. Michael Straczynski, after writing the first 3 issues of One More Day, he quit just before the issue where Spider-Man and Mary Jane made a deal with a demon. And he never went back to Marvel. He quit, I mean. So, and he just could not stand being told that the deal had to undo Aunt May. Although I also want to mention that he also wasn't on board with undoing Peter Parker's and Mary Jane's marriage. He said that in interviews. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and have us look at One More Day with the same footage, and you'll hear my thoughts on it. Forgot to say this is a top 6 things I dislike about One More Day list. Sorry. Number 6, Peter's jerky behavior throughout the whole story. Yeah, this is something that bugs me about this story. I don't mind him being a jerk to Tony Stark because he is a jerk, but there is a scene at the beginning where Doctor says he'll do him a favor because of him saving the life of someone he cares about years before. He also says he has had a loved one that died before and knows how he feels. Peter acts like a jerk toward him by saying, "You have no idea how I'm feeling." And yeah, like Linkara's thing that he says of, "No one has ever lost a loved one before me," quoting Linkara there. He also acts like a jerk to Doctor Strange and to Mary Jane when she suggests that he let Aunt May go at the end. I am putting it low on the list though, because of it not bothering me as much as these others. Number 5. Mephisto bringing Harry Osborn back from the dead for no reason. I'm putting this low on the list because they later undid Harry's resurrection in a story I've not read, because it was after another story that I'm about to talk about. This was a decision forced on J. Michael Straczynski by Joe Quesada because he could not just be satisfied getting rid of Peter's and Mary Jane's marriage. He wanted to drastically change the comics to be like the 1970s. Harry Osborn had been dead for 15 years worth of comics at the time of One More Day, and there had been a lot of good character development and story to come from it. Joe Quesada didn't care about that though, because I don't know. I guess he just didn't like Harry Osborn getting killed off in 1992. Harry Osborn was a supporting character in the Spider-Man comics after One More Day before they undid his resurrection. But to get back to undoing his resurrection, you have to understand something. There was another story before One More Day that was also written by J. Michael Straczynski called Sins Past. And this is where the viewer discretion comes in. Maybe your kids should plug their ears or leave the room while I talk about this. In that story, it ends up turning out that Gwen Stacy, who some fans consider to be his first true love, had an affair with Norman Osborn, got pregnant by him, and she gave birth to a boy and girl who were twins named Gabriel and Sarah. The way it was in that story is that because of the condition of Norman's biology after taking the Goblin formula, the twins had a genetic defect of growing too rapidly. They looked 20 years old, but were actually 10. They were lied to by Norman into thinking Peter was their father and that he abandoned them. It ended with both Gabriel and Sarah surviving, with Gabriel having amnesia to the point of not even knowing who he was, and Sarah leaving Peter to go be on her own away from him. They both were killed off in a later story. It also ended with Mary Jane revealing to Peter that she knew about, and with Peter accepting her keeping that a secret because he understands that it's just a hard thing to tell someone something like that. Also, J. Michael Straczynski did not want Norman to be the father of the kids. He wanted Peter to be the father of the kids. But the people in charge at Marvel would not let him do that. Partially because of the kids looking like adults, and also because, frankly, they think that Peter shouldn't have any kids at all. Ironically, back in the late 80s, before Peter and Mary Jane were originally married, they actually did a story where Harry Osborn and his wife Liz Allen, who, by the way, went to school with Peter when he was in high school, although he didn't meet Harry till college. Anyway, they had them both have a kid that they named Normie after, of course, Norman Osborn, Harry's father. And yet they allow that, but Peter, who is the same age as Harry and Liz, is not allowed to have children. Just wrap your head around that. Well, back around 2018, there was a Spider-Man story I read when it came out that undid Sins Past. In it, it turns out that Harry made cloned offspring with Gwen's and Norman's DNA with the help of Mendel Stromm, who was Norman's former Oscorp partner, whose story we'll get into another time. Personally, I hated that story because throughout the whole thing they were making it seem they were undoing Mary Jane's and Peter's deal with Mephisto, even having Doctor Strange go to Mephisto asking what's wrong with Peter's soul. He and Mephisto play a game of some kind to determine whether he gets that information or not. And it comes to nothing! It's never brought up again! It was completely and utterly pointless. Anyway, though, because of all that, I am putting it low on the list since they already undid it later, and there is plenty worse things to talk about. Number 4, Tony Stark and his stupid baloney reasons for not helping pay for Aunt May's medical bills. So, May does not have medical insurance. Peter, after being told by a doctor that because Peter, Mary Jane, and May herself do not have the money to pay for her to have the surgery needed, he cannot do the surgery unless someone can pay the massive debt that is required for it. So Peter leaves and goes to foolishly break into Stark Tower without his Spider-Man costume since everyone knows who he is anyway, and then starts fighting with Tony, who is in his Iron Man armor. After webbing him up, as you see here, he tells him Aunt May is dying and begs him to pay for Aunt May's medical care. Tony then says that he cannot pay for it because Peter is a fugitive of the law and that paying for Aunt May's medical care is the equivalent of giving him plane, train, or bus tickets. That is really stupid. I am pretty sure there is no law that says if someone is a fugitive and they have a relative who is in the hospital without insurance, that it is not against the law if that fugitive asks a really wealthy person they somehow know to pay their relative's medical bills. That certainly is not like giving someone a way to escape. And within that real life scenario, of course, the person would probably willingly go to the authorities and allow himself to be arrested so this guy could do that. But of course that doesn't happen here because they don't want that, so because then they can't have the deal with the demon. Anyway, then Tony leaves saying he will give Peter time to be with May, but then says he'll come back May or no May. Kind of a jerk thing to say, but what do you expect from a guy who doesn't apologize to people for sending psychopathic villains after them who almost succeed in killing them? Number 3. Doctor Strange, Hank McCoy, and Black Panther saying they can't do anything to help heal Aunt May's bullet wound. So after leaving Tony, Peter goes to the home of Doctor Strange and asks him to heal Aunt May's bullet wound. He says he can't, which is baloney because he is a neurosurgeon and is more than capable of healing bullet wounds with the assistance of magic. After this, in one moment in time, he heals Mary Jane, who is injured by another assassin hired by the Kingpin. Forgot to mention that. Kingpin hired a sniper to kill Peter, and the sniper hit Aunt May instead, because Peter had unmasked himself to the media during Civil War, so everyone knows who he is. Anyway, Doctor Strange does allow Peter to use a magical device which allows him to see multiple people without it taking up any time, because magic. This is where it gets more stupid. Some of these people don't make sense to visit, such as Hank Pym, Dr. Michael Morbius, and Dr. Octopus. They are all scientists. I am reminded of this scene in the original Secret Wars, where Volcana begs Dr. Octopus to heal her boyfriend, the Molecule Man, but he says he couldn't if he wanted to, since he is not an MD. Then he visits this character that I had to ask online who it was, and it turns out it is Dead Girl, an X-Men character who had only been created 5 years before this story. She, funnily enough, has the power to turn dead bodies into zombies or ghosts. She does not know how to heal a bullet wound. Frankly, I would have rather had this story end with Dead Girl going to Peter to Aunt May's dead body and having her turn Aunt May's body into a ghost. Then have Aunt May as a ghost in the comics that only Dead Girl, Mary Jane, and Peter can see. But obviously that was not going to happen because Joe Quesada and others at Marvel would never be able to accept it. But the dumbest part of this is where he visits Hank McCoy / Beast and T'Challa / Black Panther. Hank McCoy does have the knowledge to heal bullet wounds and the technology and meds needed to save Aunt May's life. T'Challa / Black Panther has robotic machines capable of doing any surgical procedure. He and his country owe Spider-Man a favor for helping them against some villains there in Wakanda before. A guy who has robotic machines capable of doing any surgical procedure saying he can't help heal a bullet wound is so ridiculous that there are not words enough in the entire world to describe how utterly dumb it is. This scene of him visiting T'Challa is like you going to the hospital with a massive cut on your arm and having a nurse tell you, "I'm sorry, nobody here is qualified to deal with the massive cut on your arm. You're just going to have to go outside and bleed to death." It is that ridiculous. It also comes across like JMS, Joe Quesada, and everyone else involved completely forgot what these characters could do. I think I've talked about this scene enough. On to the next dumb scene. Number 2. The insulting remarks JMS made through the alternate Peter Parker. So there is this pointless premise near the end of One More Day where after Peter meets his hypothetical daughter that he would have had with Mary Jane, he meets alternate versions of himself who Mephisto tells him about right after. The first alternate version of himself is a video game designer who says the only reason he plays video games is because he is a loser who wants something more with his life. And I am sort of quoting Linkara there. He also attacks escapist fiction in the same way too. I have no idea why JMS would make these kind of remarks and attack the very things he's written in the past. A lot of people know JMS from Babylon 5. I have never watched Babylon 5, but JMS did write one of my favorite cartoons from when I was a kid that I still watch today, Real Ghostbusters. My favorite Real Ghostbusters episodes by him are Chickeny Clucked, which, funnily enough, is about a guy who gets screwed over after making a deal with a demon, and The Thing in Mrs. Faversham's attic. This comment is basically saying that Spider-Man comics and shows like Babylon 5 and Real Ghostbusters are a waste of time, and that we only watch them because of wanting more in life. That is really offensive. I will never understand JMS attacking his own body of work. Regardless, this is really frustrating, and I will never understand why it was put in this comic by JMS. Number 1. The deal with Mephisto. So this whole thing happened because Joe Quesada wanted to erase Mary Jane's and Peter's marriage from existence through magic. I will never ever understand how he or anyone else at Marvel could possibly have thought having Peter and Mary Jane make a deal with a demon was a good idea. I almost want to make a video of fiction showing how this whole scene between Joe Quesada, JMS, and some other Marvel executives deciding to have Mary Jane and Peter make a deal with a demon went. That could be funny. The whole deal is stupid because most people would not erase their relationship with their spouse from existence in exchange for bringing their parent back to life. Nobody would make that deal. It's what makes this whole thing stupid. Also, I think a deal with a demon is wrong because I am a Christian and of course believe that demons are from hell and that they're servants of the devil. Also, it completely goes against his entire motto of with great power comes great responsibility. I can only imagine what Uncle Ben would tell Peter, knowing he made that deal with a demon and how close he was to having Aunt May in the afterlife. He'd probably say something like, "You jerk, Peter! I was this close to having May with me in heaven, and then you ruined it! You also forsook everything May and I have taught you! Shame on you!" Also, there are these frustrating scenes at the end where Mephisto shows a vision of their daughter they would have had, saying she will never be. That reminds me there was a long-running series I own partially in trades and partially in physical comics called Spider-Girl, and they did a later series called Amazing Spider-Girl, which I also own in trades. It is a favorite of mine because it's about a future where Mary Jane and Peter stayed married. Peter retired from being Spider-Man after he was injured in a fight with Norman Osborn's Green Goblin, who was killed in that fight. And their daughter, who was sort of killed off in a previous story, turned out not to be dead and ended up back with them. Years later, when she is a teen, she starts having her dad's spider powers. I'll get back to some of that later. This is basically Joe Quesada saying through JMS, "Yeah, that comic series you like will never be a reality in the mainstream universe because I say so." Also, something else bad is that it's Mary Jane who convinces Peter to listen to the demon Mephisto, and Mephisto gives her a compliment of being sensible. That is so frustrating and it ruins Mary Jane's character.
Also, something I forgot to say is that it really feels like JMS intentionally wrote this story so it was stupid because of being so frustrated by having to do things he doesn't want to do. And Joe Quesada, who I forgot to mention was the artist on One More Day, just went with all the stupid because of being so desperate to have what he wanted. That might not be true, but it does feel that way. I feel you can't write stuff that stupid on accident. Also, the reason JMS left after this was not because of the deal with the demon, though he said in an interview that he didn't like that. No, it was because Joe Quesada told him he had to undo the 5 years worth of story and character development of Aunt May knowing Peter Parker was Spider-Man. For 5 years, Aunt May and Peter were closer than they ever had been. But Joe Quesada didn't like that, and right after this, she is like this. What a load of character retraction. And that's a good word. That's what Joe Quesada and others at Marvel wanted. Character retraction. It is the opposite of character development. Now on to One Moment in Time. This later story is frustrating as well for different reasons. There is a frustrating moment in this comic written by Joe Quesada where he retcons out Peter's and Mary Jane's marriage in a way that is pretty frustrating to fans like me that grew up reading comics of them being married. Although I bought a few comics when I was little, I didn't get that into comics until my freshman year of high school. After school every day, I'd walk to this local comic shop owned by a guy named Dennis. I'd go to the 50-cent section and buy Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man 1990 series comics, and even some of the Venom comics like Venom Lethal Protector and Venom Madness. And I even had the Venom Lethal Protector with the holofoil cover. Anyway, I'll get back to that later. And one of the Amazing Spider-Man comics I got was the first appearance of Carnage. Yeah, not kidding. Although, to be fair, in 2001, his only media was the 90s Spider-Man cartoon where he wasn't done that well. And the other most recent thing was the video game that was on PlayStation 1, Sega Dreamcast, Nintendo 64, and PC, which was just called Spider-Man. Anyway, all the ones I bought were from when Peter and Mary Jane were married. Sadly, when I lost my job in high school, I sold all those comics back to Dennis. I now wish I hadn't. Because of all this, I could not stand scanning the scenes of his retcon. I mean, Joe Quesada's retcon. And so, enjoy these images from Amazing Spider-Man Annual 21, where Peter and Mary Jane got married. Well, I'll talk about this stupid retcon. Anyway, Joe Quesada retcons it so that Peter never showed up for his own wedding because of being knocked out by a regular human being who was a criminal. Not kidding. He actually wrote that. That actually is a thing that happens in this comic story. Mary Jane is so upset by this, she breaks up with Peter and tells him she never wants to see him again. Then later, she and her Aunt Anna get threatened by the guy who stopped Spider-Man earlier. He succeeds in shooting Mary Jane, but Spider-Man shows up just in time to stop him from killing them. And he takes Mary Jane to Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange heals her. Although I am not showing that scene. I will say it's dumb, he couldn't heal Aunt May in One More Day, but can heal Mary Jane here. And then there's this stupid thing. Because of Mary Jane getting shot earlier, and Aunt Anna also getting threatened by the same guy, Tony Stark, Reed Richards, and Doctor Strange get together and build a machine that with Doctor Strange's magic can erase everyone but theirs and Mary Jane's knowledge that Peter is Spider-Man. And yeah, that's because Peter could not stand Mary Jane not knowing. There is a huge problem with this. Black Cat first found out Peter was Spider-Man in the early 1980s. She has a long history with Peter that is basically erased from existence. Like this story from the early 90s, where to get back at Peter for not getting with her previously, she dates Flash Thompson so she can break his heart, devastating him and Peter. How does this story even work if she doesn't know Peter is Spider-Man? Or how about this scene from Maximum Carnage of him asking her for advice? How do these things work, or are even part of continuity if she doesn't know Peter is Spider-Man? My guess is that Joe Quesada just didn't like all those things from her past and wanted her to be more like she was before Peter revealed his identity to her. But there is no reason she couldn't have kept her knowledge that Peter was Spider-Man. By the way, she was only in one comic between 2012 and 2013 I read that tied in with Daredevil, which I was not subscribed to, so I didn't get to find out what happened to her in that story. She would not appear again till Superior Spider-Man, where Doc Ock had taken over Peter's body, makes her furious by knocking out her teeth, because he didn't know who she was, and he considered her a villain. Also, as far as I know, Black Cat is still more a villain than a good guy now. Way to have more character retraction. This whole thing of erasing everyone's knowledge that Peter is Spider-Man is even worse for Norman Osborn and the Venom symbiote. How does Norman remember killing Gwen Stacy in front of Peter? How does he remember the storyline Revelations where he kills Ben Reilly and has a waitress put food poisoning into the very pregnant Mary Jane's food so that she will have a miscarriage? Oh yeah, Joe Quesada retconned out that long premise from the past because he could not stand Mary Jane being pregnant if she wasn't married to Peter. Not kidding. Joe Quesada did that and made this long-time premise for the 90s Clone Saga never happen. Also, how does the symbiote even remember being bonded to Peter? Or much less this scene where it comes to Peter as Eddie Brock in front of Aunt May. How does that scene make any sense if it doesn't know Peter is Spider-Man? Not only that, but it undoes Peter's entire story from Civil War. Thanks for making Peter's story from Civil War pointless. It's not like some of us might not have wanted character development and story of everyone knowing Peter is Spider-Man, and maybe having him become as well known and respected as other superheroes whose identities are known, but nope! Joe Quesada wanted to make the comics more like the 1970s, so everything from the past a lot of us like had to be gotten rid of. And now I'm going to say why I think Joe Quesada and other people are wrong in rejecting Mary Jane as Peter's true love. This is Betty Brant, who was first introduced in Amazing Spider-Man number 4 in 1963. She was J. Jonah Jameson's secretary at the Daily Bugle. She was Peter Parker's first love interest when he was in high school, and she lasted as his girlfriend until after he started college. Their relationship was strained when Spider-Man was unable to save her brother from being shot to death by a mobster because the mobster had hired Dr. Octopus to deal with Spider-Man. Her brother had made a deal with the mobster and owed a debt to him. She did, though, let go of her hatred of Spider-Man, especially when she also was threatened by another villain and he saved her from it. After that, though, in Amazing Spider-Man number 33, after a fight with Doc Ock called the Master Planner story, which you should check out because it's really good, she got freaked out after Peter comes into the Daily Bugle with pictures of the aftermath of his fight with Doc Ock because he has bruises on his face from said fight. She gets freaked out, quits her job at the Daily Bugle, and ends up having nightmares about Spider-Man unmasking in front of her and him being Peter Parker. But she could not stand the thought of Peter being Spider-Man. She ends up marrying a reporter named Ned Leeds, who sadly ends up becoming the Hobgoblin, and is murdered by Russian mercenaries on the order of Jason Philip Macendale so he can be Hobgoblin. Then Ned being Hobgoblin gets undone later, but that is a story for another time. Then there was Gwen Stacy, who a lot of people feel was Peter's first true love. They had their struggles, but were close to each other. But their relationship was ruined in Amazing Spider-Man number 90, when Spider-Man was fighting Doc Ock on the roof of a building. He puts chemicals on Doc Ock's tentacles to make him lose control of them. This causes Doc Ock to unintentionally knock a huge chunk of the building into the streets below. The rubble almost hits a little boy, but Gwen's father, George, rushes over, pushes the boy out of harm's way, and gets hit by the rubble himself. Gwen is so angry at Spider-Man for this. She later supports a DA candidate named Sam Bullitt, who promises to push the police to hunt down and arrest Spider-Man. He of course turns out to be a villain working with mobsters, and ends up getting arrested for it. Then, not long after this, without even telling Peter, Gwen ends up flying away on an airplane to France to be with some relatives of hers there without telling Peter, as you see in this panel of him arriving at the airport, seeing the plane go away, and realizing he's lost her, and of course he's sad about it. Also, earlier in that comic, she had said to Peter that she loves him but hates Spider-Man. Anyway, she ends up coming back, actually, and not long after she comes back, she is killed by Norman Osborn's Green Goblin. The real tragedy there is she dies being ignorant of the fact that the man she hated was the man she thought she loved. She was in love with the very man who caused her father's death, but never found this out, and she never would have ever found out, since her hatred of Spider-Man made Peter never want to reveal who he really was to her. According to an interview you can see here on YouTube with Gary Conway, who wrote that story of Gwen's death, it was the artist John Romita, who did the art on Amazing Spider-Man comics then, who came up with the idea to kill Gwen off. Everyone else in charge at the time went along with it. By the way, it also says in that interview that they actually considered killing off Aunt May. Imagine how different One More Day would have been if Aunt May had been killed off permanently back then. Anyway, Gary Conway said he agreed to kill off Gwen because he found her boring and preferred Mary Jane as the love interest. Personally, and no disrespect to him because I do like his run on Amazing Spider-Man, but that makes it sound like he was a bit incompetent in not being able to ride her in a way he liked. Though there is a huge problem I just mentioned of her hating Spider-Man that, whether he mentioned it or not, may have led to his and others' decision to kill her off. Then there is Black Cat, who I mentioned earlier, who really only loves Spider-Man and didn't care for who he really was after he revealed his identity of Peter Parker to her. After making a deal with the Kingpin to get bad luck powers that would affect Spider-Man badly, Spider-Man, after finding out she did that, breaks up with her, as you see here. So she didn't work as a love interest either. This is why Mary Jane was meant to be Peter's wife. She is the only one who ever loved and accepted him as both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. She is the only love interest who worked. Why Joe Quesada and others at Marvel reject all these things, I have no idea. Then again, as Linkara once said, a lot of them seem to not want Peter to be in a successful relationship with anyone because they think it would be a turn-off for kids that way. Yeah, that seems a bit silly thing to say, since most kids, even as far back as 10 years ago, don't read comics. Not saying none of them do, but most of them don't go to a comic shop, and I myself have rarely ever seen a kid at a comic shop any time I went. It doesn't help that the only way to buy new comics is to go to the comic shop. They do not sell new comics at grocery stores or even bookstores, which is where most kids would go with their parents. Unless one of their parents is into comics and goes to a local comic store with their kid, the kid will never get into comics. I have 2 brothers and 3 sisters. All 3 of my sisters have kids, and none of my sisters or their husbands are that into comics. So it's doubtful any of my nieces or nephews are ever going to be that into comics. Some of them don't even, like the ones I have in Iowa, don't even have a local comic shop near them to go. But back to the subject at hand. For whatever reason, both people at Marvel and those who read current Spider-Man comics do not want Peter Parker and Mary Jane to be together, and they have every right to feel that way whether I like it or not. Some of them probably are not that on board with a lot of the other things this story did, though. But anyway, whether I like it or not, the comics have been drastically changed from what I grew up with, and some say I should just accept it, but I really can't. To be fair though, I do have plenty of older comics, like from the DVD-ROM I showed you that I've copied files from on my computer, that I can go through.
Yeah, One More Day and One Moment in Time, they both really stink. And they are awful stories that never should have happened, and they have too many retcons. I don't like Black Cat not knowing Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and that ruins everything because it ruins her whole history where she did know that. I also don't like Aunt May's whole character getting gotten rid of, or just the really bad way he undid the wedding that I didn't show, where he retcons it that Peter never showed up for his wedding. That was wrong. And I also don't like the whole, retconning out that everyone knows Peter is Spider-Man by having Magic and Tony Stark and Doctor Strange and Mr. Fantastic all get together and undo that. And there could have been a lot of character development and story of everyone knowing Peter is Spider-Man. He could have even become like the Fantastic Four where everyone knows them. But nope, Joe Quesada didn't want that. He wanted to forcibly make the comics like the 70s. And that's what both One More Day and One Moment in Time are about. Just a stubborn man who wants things to be like when he was a kid. And I don't hate Joe Quesada, I just couldn't disagree with him more on his stance on Spider-Man. Well, next time we're going to look at the first appearance of Mephisto and Silver Surfer #3 and find out why Silver Surfer is way wiser than Peter Parker and Mary Jane.